The Vampire King held his left hand in the candle flame for the 11th second while discussing municipal tax reform with the mayor, and when he finally withdrew it, the skin was blistered white, but he felt nothing at all. Kazimir Kovar had performed this ritual every year for the past 800, always at the autumn gala in whatever hall or palace he currently occupied, and the result never changed. No pain, no heat, no confirmation that anything inside him still worked the way it should. He flexed the damaged fingers experimentally, watching the ruined skin crack without interest, then reached for his wine glass with his other hand. "You're very dedicated to the arts funding proposal," the mayor said, apparently having noticed nothing. "I find consistency valuable," Kazimir replied, which was true in ways the man would never understand. The gala filled the concert hall he'd purchased and restored over the past decade, all vaulted ceilings and gold leaf that caught the chandelier light. 200 mortals in evening wear circulated below, donors and city officials who believed Kazimir Kovar to be merely wealthy, merely reclusive, merely strange in the way that old money often was. They didn't see the 3 other vampires stationed at careful intervals around the room, or recognize the security personnel as blood-sworn servants, or understand that the building's lower levels contained an entire court that had governed the city's supernatural affairs since before the mayor's great-great-grandfather was born. Kazimir excused himself and moved toward the backstage area, his burned hand already beginning to heal. By morning it would be perfect again, the skin unblemished, ready for next year's test. He'd been doing this since 1224, the year he'd paid Elisabetta the Blood Witch to take every sensation from his body. No touch, no taste, no temperature, no physical pleasure or pain. He'd begged her for it 3 days after he'd failed to save his sister from the hunter's fire, after he'd been forced to watch her burn because he'd been half a country away settling some pointless territorial dispute. The grief had been caustic, unsustainable, and Elisabetta had offered him a solution. "You'll feel nothing," she'd promised. "No hurt, no loss, nothing." "Good," he'd said, and paid her half in blood and gold. The remainder of the bargain had never been settled. Elisabetta had died 18 months later, killed by a rival, and Kazimir had simply continued existing in his careful numbness. His court respected him for it. The Vampire King who could not be swayed by pleasure or pain, who made every decision with perfect rational clarity, who never flinched or wavered or showed weakness. They didn't know it was a purchased absence rather than earned control. He pushed through the stage door into the wings, where equipment cases and music stands created narrow pathways in the darkness. Someone was sitting on an equipment crate near the piano, silhouetted against the work light. A woman, he noted distantly, wearing coveralls and holding a tuning lever. "The hall is supposed to be closed backstage during events," he said. She looked up, entirely unimpressed. "The piano is a quarter step sharp on the upper register. It's been bothering me all night. I figured I'd fix it now instead of coming back tomorrow." Kazimir moved closer. She was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark curly hair pulled back in a practical knot and grease smudged on one cheek. Her eyes were brown and direct, meeting his without the usual mortal nervousness. He recognized her vaguely from the tuning company the hall contracted with. "You're the 3rd shift technician," he said. "Zara Thorne. You're the owner who overpaid for a concert hall that only needed cosmetic work, not a complete rebuild." She turned back to the piano, striking a key and listening with focused attention. "Why'd you replace the entire foundation when the original would have lasted another century?" "The original had cells beneath it where they kept prisoners during the war trials of 1847, Kazimir said. "I wanted them gone." Zara glanced at him with something that might have been approval. "Fair enough." She adjusted something inside the piano, then noticed his hand. Her eyes widened. "What did you do?" He'd forgotten about the burns and the distraction of conversation. "An experiment." "An experiment in what? Candle safety?" She set down her tools and stood, reaching for his wrist. Her fingers were warm against his skin, though he couldn't feel the pressure or texture. "You need to run that under cold water. Those are 2nd-degree burns at least." "It's fine." "It's not fine. That's a waste of a good hand." She was already pulling him toward the utility sink in the corner, her grip firm and completely unafraid. Something about that directness caught his attention more thoroughly than anything had in decades. She turned on the tap and guided his hand under the stream, and Kazimir watched her face instead of the water sluicing over his blistered skin. "You're not afraid of me," he observed. "Should I be? You're just a rich guy with terrible self-preservation instincts." She held his hand steady under the cold water, her thumb resting against his pulse point. "And before you tell me you don't need help, I've seen burns like this. My brother used to work in a restaurant. You leave these untreated, they'll get infected." "They won't," Kazimir said, which was true, but unexplainable. Zara gave him a look that suggested she'd dealt with stubborn men before and found them tedious. "At least let me bandage it. I've got a first aid kit in my tool bag." He should have refused, should have simply left and let his supernatural healing complete its work in private. Instead, he found himself standing still while she dried his hand with careful pats of paper towel and retrieved a compact medical kit from her equipment. Her movements were efficient and practiced, wrapping gauze around his palm and fingers with the ease of someone who'd done this many times. "You're good at this," he said. "3 younger siblings. I've bandaged everything from scraped knees to the time my sister tried to pierce her own ears with a sewing needle." She secured the gauze with medical tape, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary on his wrist. "There. Try not to stick it in any more open flames tonight." "I'll restrain myself." She looked up at him then, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. Curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of recognition that he wasn't quite what he seemed. Kazimir had become expert at identifying that moment, the instant before mortals started asking questions he couldn't safely answer. Usually he deflected with money or influence or simply left. Instead, he said, "Why does a piano tuner work the night shift? Pays better, and I like the quiet. You can actually hear what you're doing when there aren't people everywhere." She tilted her head, studying him with the same focused attention she'd given the piano. "Why does a concert hall owner test his pain tolerance with candles? Old habit. That's not an answer." "No," Kazimir agreed. "It's not." They stood there in the backstage dimness, her hand still loosely circling his bandaged wrist, and he felt the strangest impulse to tell her the truth. All of it. The 800 years, the sister he'd failed, the witch who'd taken his senses, the endless gray existence that stretched behind and ahead of him. Instead, he carefully extracted his hand from her grip and stepped back. "Thank you for the medical attention." "You're welcome for the medical attention you didn't want and won't actually need," Zara said, but she was almost smiling. "I'll finish with the piano and get out of your hair. Enjoy the rest of your gala." Kazimir returned to the reception, his hand already healing beneath the unnecessary bandages, and found his second in command, Draven, waiting with a concerned expression. "You were gone for 17 minutes, Draven said quietly. "The council members are asking questions. Let them ask." Kazimir accepted a fresh wine glass from a passing server, though he couldn't taste it. "Is there actual business requiring my attention? 3 territory disputes in the outer wards, a request from the Southside Coven for mediation, and Severin wants to discuss the blood supply contracts before they renew next month." Draven paused. "Also, one of the younger vampires fed too openly last week. Witnesses. Handle the disputes according to established protocol. Tell the Coven I'll meet with them Thursday. Severin can present his concerns in writing, and if I find them valid, we'll negotiate. As for the feeding incident," Kazimir considered, "remind whoever it was that discretion is not optional. If they can't control themselves, they can leave the city. Already done. They've been confined to quarters pending your formal judgment." "Good." Draven hesitated, which meant he had something else to say. After 300 years of service, Kazimir could read his tells perfectly. "What is it?" "Your hand. You test it again." "I test every year." "Yes, but—" Draven lowered his voice further. "My lord, 8 centuries is a long time to carry a curse, even a purchased one. Perhaps it's time to seek another blood witch, see if the magic can be undone." "No." Kazimir's voice was flat. "The absence is preferable." Preferable to what? Preferable to remembering. Preferable to feeling the full weight of his failure every waking moment. Preferable to the grief that had nearly destroyed him when Mira died. But he didn't say any of that. He simply met Draven's eyes until the other vampire nodded and changed the subject. The gala concluded at midnight. Kazimir made appropriate farewell remarks, thanked the donors, and waited until the last mortal had departed before descending to the lower levels where his actual court gathered. The space had once been storage and dressing rooms. He'd converted it into something closer to the old fortress halls he remembered from his early centuries. Stone and dark wood, tapestries that dampened sound, chandeliers fitted with bulbs that mimicked candlelight. 30 vampires occupied the main chamber, members of his council and their attendants. They rose when he entered, a gesture of respect he'd never demanded, but that had evolved naturally over the centuries. Kazimir took his place at the head table and gestured for them to sit. "The winter session is called to order," he said. "First matter, the territory disputes." They worked through the agenda with practiced efficiency. Kazimir listened to arguments, rendered judgments, approved proposals, and deferred complications for further investigation. His court ran smoothly because he'd built it that way, establishing clear laws and consistent enforcement. No favoritism, no emotional decisions, no weakness that could be exploited. They respected him because he was predictable, unshakable, exactly what a king should be. Near dawn, he dismissed them and retreated to his private quarters, a suite of rooms that occupied the hall's sub-basement. No windows, reinforced walls, a bed he slept in only because the appearance of normalcy mattered. He removed the bandage from his hand and confirmed what he already knew. The burns were gone, the skin perfect, no evidence they'd ever existed. He thought of Zara Thorne calling it a waste, her practical outrage at his carelessness, the warmth of her fingers against his wrist that he'd registered intellectually but not felt. When was the last time someone had touched him with simple, uncomplicated concern? Not in centuries. His court feared him or respected him or wanted things from him, but none of them would have bothered with bandages. Kazimir lay down as the sun rose somewhere above him and didn't sleep. He never slept deeply, hadn't since the curse took hold. Instead, he existed in a gray space between waking and unconsciousness, aware but detached, counting the hours until evening when his court would need him again. 3 nights later, he found himself back at the concert hall after a scheduled performance, walking through the empty building for no reason he could articulate. The piano sat silent on the stage, lid closed, and he approached it the way he might approach something dangerous. He'd been avoiding music since Mira died. She'd loved it, played the lute with skill that had drawn admirers even in their small village, and after she was gone, the sound of instruments had felt like accusation. "It sounds better now." Kazimir turned. Zara stood in the stage-left entrance, tool bag over her shoulder, wearing the same practical coveralls. She walked to the piano and opened the lid with familiar ease. "You fixed it," he said. "That's generally what I'm paid for." She sat on the bench and played a quick ascending scale, listening critically. "You should hire someone to play it more often. Pianos are like people, they get sulky when they're neglected." "I'll take that under advisement." She glanced at his hand, which was uncovered and unblemished. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Healed fast. I'm fortunate." "Right, fortunate." She played another series of notes, something that sounded like the beginning of a melody. "You know, most building owners don't wander around their properties at 1 in the morning. I could say the same for piano tuners. I told you, night shift." She continued playing, the melody taking shape into something he almost recognized. "Do you play?" "No." "Ever?" "Not in a very long time." Kazimir moved closer despite himself, drawn by the sound he'd been avoiding for 800 years. "What is that piece?" "Something I'm writing, or trying to. It's not finished yet." She stopped, fingers resting on the keys. "You can sit if you want. I don't bite." The irony of that statement was not lost on him, but he sat anyway, at the far end of the bench with careful distance between them. Zara resumed playing, and Kazimir watched her hands move across the keys with the same focused precision she'd used while bandaging his burns. She was mortal, temporary, irrelevant in the span of his existence, and yet something about her groundedness made him feel less like he was floating through an endless gray void. "Why did you really buy this hall?" she asked without stopping the music. "I told you. The foundations." "No, I mean, why a concert hall at all? You've got money. You could own anything. But you picked a place dedicated to music and then you barely use it." Kazimir considered lying, then found he didn't want to. "Someone I knew loved music. I thought if I preserved a place for it, that might mean something." "Did it?" "No." Zara's hand stilled on the keys. She turned to look at him, and her expression was softer than before. "I'm sorry. That sounds like a loss. It was a long time ago. Grief doesn't really work on a schedule, though, does it?" She played a single low note, letting it resonate through the empty hall. "My mom died when I was 19. Everyone kept telling me it would get easier, and they were right, but also wrong. It did get easier to live with, but the actual missing her part never went away. It just changed shape." Something in Kazimir's chest twisted, an almost feeling that shouldn't have been possible. He'd built walls specifically to avoid this kind of conversation, this kind of recognition. And yet here was this mortal woman describing exactly what he'd run from for 8 centuries. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said. "You're very good at what you do." "Thanks. She's actually the one who taught me piano first before I got into the technical side." Zara smiled, small and sad. She'd probably be annoyed that I spend more time tuning than playing now, but someone's got to keep the instruments working. They sat in silence for a moment, the concert hall vast and quiet around them. Then Zara stood and held out her hand. "Come on, I want to show you something." Kazimir accepted her hand automatically, forgetting for a moment that he couldn't feel the touch, and let her lead him backstage to a narrow staircase he'd never noticed. They climbed 3 flights to a door marked "Roof Access Authorized Personnel Only," which Zara opened with a key from her pocket. "You have roof access?" "I tune all the concert halls in the city. You collect keys after a while." She pushed the door open and stepped out into the November night. The roof was flat and empty, except for HVAC equipment and old chimney stacks from when the building had used coal heating. The city spread out around them, lights and traffic, and the ordinary chaos of mortal life. Zara walked to the edge and sat down, legs dangling over the side, completely unafraid of the 4-story drop. "Best view in the building," she said, patting the space beside her. Kazimir sat, more carefully. Heights didn't frighten him. He couldn't die from a fall, but the human instinct for caution persisted even after 800 years. "I come up here sometimes when I need to think," Zara said. "It helps. Getting above everything, remembering the city is bigger than whatever problem I'm dealing with." She looked at him sideways. "You seem like someone who needs to think a lot." "An accurate assessment." "Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." "Fair enough." She leaned back on her hands, tilting her face up toward the sky. "You know what's weird? I feel like I know you, but I don't actually know anything about you. Not really. Where you're from, how old you are, what you do besides own buildings. You're like a mystery wrapped in expensive suits and weird candle experiments. Some mysteries are better left unsolved." See, that's exactly the kind of thing a mysterious person would say. She grinned at him, and Kazimir felt that almost feeling again, the ghost of warmth in his chest that shouldn't exist. "Fine. Keep your secrets. But I'm going to keep asking questions until I figure you out." "Why?" "Because you're interesting. And because you looked really sad when I was playing piano earlier, and I have this terrible habit of wanting to help sad people feel less sad." She nudged his shoulder lightly with hers. "It's a character flaw. I'm working on it." Kazimir turned to look at her properly. She was lovely in an unassuming way, all practical competence and unexpected kindness, and for the first time in 800 years, he wished desperately that he could feel the night air, feel the concrete beneath him, feel the warmth of another person sitting close, feel anything at all beyond this endless purchased absence. "You should go home," he said quietly. "It's late." "I will, but first, She shifted closer, closing the distance between them, and before he could process what she intended, she kissed him. It was brief and soft, barely more than a press of lips, and Kazimir sat frozen in shock as she pulled back. Zara's eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. I shouldn't have." Then the curse broke. It didn't crack slowly or fade gradually. It shattered all at once, like glass struck with a hammer, and 800 years of suppressed sensation crashed into Kazimir in a single devastating wave. He felt the concrete rough beneath his palms, the night air cold against his face, his heart beating in his chest with startling violence. He felt the lingering warmth where Zara's lips had touched his, felt the fabric of his shirt against his skin, felt everything everywhere all at once with excruciating intensity. And beneath it all, rising like a tide that had been dammed for centuries, came the grief. Mira burning, Mira screaming, Mira dying while he was too far away to help, because he'd been too proud and too focused on his position to recognize the danger until it was too late. The loss he'd run from for 800 years hit him with its original force, undiminished by time, and Kazimir made a sound he didn't recognize as his own voice. Zara's hands were on his face, her voice urgent. "Kazimir? What's wrong? What happened?" He couldn't answer. The world was too loud, too bright, too much. His skin felt like it was burning, every nerve firing signals his brain had forgotten how to process. He was going to fly apart, disintegrate, cease to exist under the weight of everything he'd been avoiding. "Look at me," Zara said firmly. "Kazimir, look at me." He managed to focus on her face. Her eyes were dark and concerned, her hands warm against his cheeks, and that single point of contact felt like the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. "Breathe," she said. "Whatever this is, just breathe through it." "I can't." The words came out broken. "It's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Come on, with me." She demonstrated, exaggerating the breaths, and Kazimir tried to copy her, air moving in and out of his lungs, a process he'd performed automatically for centuries that now felt strange and difficult. "Good. That's good. Keep going." Gradually, incrementally, the overwhelming chaos began to settle into something approaching bearable. He could distinguish individual sensations instead of being drowned in an undifferentiated flood. The cold air, Zara's thumbs stroking gentle circles against his cheekbones. The grief still there, but not quite as suffocating as those first terrible seconds. "What happened?" Zara asked quietly. "1 second we were talking, and then you kissed me. I know, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have assumed." "No." Kazimir caught her wrists, feeling the fragile bones beneath her skin, the flutter of her pulse. The sensation was overwhelming and necessary. "You broke something. A curse. I've been numb for 800 years, and you broke it." Zara stared at him. 800 years. "I'm not human, Zara. I'm a vampire. The king of the city's vampire court. I paid a blood witch to take my ability to feel anything physical because my sister died and I couldn't survive the grief. And you just with 1 kiss. That's not possible. Look at me." He released her wrists and held up his hand, willing his fangs to extend. They dropped smoothly, a reflex he'd controlled so carefully around her, and Zara's eyes went wide. It's possible. All of it. She didn't scream or run or faint. Instead, she reached out slowly and touched the tip of one fang with her index finger, testing it like she might test a piano wire for tension. "Holy shit," she said. You're really..." "Yes." "And you couldn't feel anything? For 800 years?" "Nothing. No touch, no taste, no pain or pleasure. Just existence without sensation." Zara pulled her hand back, processing. That sounds like hell. It was preferable to the alternative. Was it, though? She studied his face with that same focused attention. "Because you look absolutely miserable right now, and I'm guessing it's not just because you can suddenly feel things again." Kazimir closed his eyes. The grief was still there, patient and enormous, waiting for him to acknowledge it fully. "The curse was holding back what I ran from. My sister Mira died in 1224. Hunters burned her alive because she was vampire, and I was 200 miles away resolving a stupid territorial dispute when it happened. I failed her. I was supposed to protect her, and I failed, and the guilt nearly destroyed me. So I paid Elisabetta to make me numb, and it worked. For 8 centuries, it worked. But now it doesn't. Now I feel everything I've been avoiding, the loss, the failure, the grief, all of it, exactly as fresh as the day she died. Zara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My mom died of cancer. We had 6 months from diagnosis to the end, and I was with her the whole time. And afterward, I wished so hard that I could just not feel it. The missing her, the anger that she was gone, the guilt that I couldn't save her even though logically I knew cancer didn't work that way. I would have done anything to make it stop hurting." Exactly. But I couldn't. I had to feel it. And eventually, not quickly, but eventually the feeling changed. It's still there, but it's not the same. The grief became something I could carry instead of something that was crushing me. She touched his arm lightly, and the contact sang through his nervous system. "You can't run from it forever, Kazimir. It doesn't work. You just end up frozen in the worst moment instead of getting through it to the other side. I've had 800 years frozen. I don't know if I remember how to move forward. Then maybe it's time to learn again." She stood and held out her hand, an echo of the gesture from earlier. "Come on. We're getting off this roof before you have an 8-century delayed breakdown and fall off the edge." Kazimir accepted her hand, and the simple touch of skin on skin was almost overwhelming. He could feel the calluses on her fingers from piano work, the warmth of her palm, the gentle pressure as she helped him to his feet. They made their way back down the stairs, and by the time they reached the backstage area, he'd regained some equilibrium. The sensations were still intense, but he was learning to process them again. "I should go," Zara said, but she didn't release his hand. This is a lot. You probably need time to deal with it." "Wait." Kazimir tightened his grip slightly, afraid that if she left, the curse would somehow snap back into place and he'd lose this terrifying, necessary return to feeling. "I need to explain properly. The court, the politics, what I am. If you're going to be involved in what? In this. In me." The words felt clumsy, but he pushed forward anyway. "You broke an 800-year curse with a single kiss, Zara. That's not coincidence. That's not chance. That's magic. Connection." He drew her closer, watching her face for signs of fear or rejection. "I haven't felt anything in 8 centuries, and then you appeared, and suddenly I'm feeling everything. I don't believe in fate, but I believe in significance. And you're significant." Zara's cheeks flushed, color rising in a way that he could now see and, even more remarkably, feel the heat of as she stepped nearer. "That's possibly the most intense thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm aware I'm not doing this correctly. I don't remember how courtship works in this century." "Courtship?" She laughed, but not unkindly. "Okay, we're definitely going to need to work on your modern dating vocabulary. But first, I need you to be honest with me. Is this safe? Being around you, being involved with vampires, all of it?" "No," Kazimir said, because she deserved honesty. "My world is dangerous. There are politics and territories and ancient grudges. There's violence when necessary. You would be at risk simply by association. But would you protect me? With everything I have? Then I guess we'll figure out the rest as we go." She rose on her toes and kissed him again, and this time Kazimir could actually feel it. The softness of her lips, the warmth of her breath, the gentle pressure as she leaned into him. It was extraordinary and terrifying, and he never wanted it to stop. When she finally pulled back, she was smiling. "See? That's way better when you can actually feel it." "Infinitely better," Kazimir agreed, his voice rougher than usual. They stood there in the empty concert hall, hands clasped, and Kazimir felt the weight of 800 years beginning to shift. The grief was still there, enormous and patient, but for the first time since Mira's death, it didn't seem quite so insurmountable. Not when Zara was looking at him like he was someone worth knowing, instead of something to fear. "I need to tell my court," he said, "about the curse breaking. They're going to notice the changes." "Changes like what?" "I'll eat food now, though I won't need it. I'll sleep properly instead of just existing through the daylight hours. I'll react to temperature and pain and pleasure like any other vampire. For 8 centuries, I've been the king who couldn't be swayed by physical sensation, and now you're just a king who can feel things, Zara finished. Is that really so bad? Some of them will see it as weakness. Then they're idiots. She squeezed his hand. Feeling things doesn't make you weak. It makes you alive. Kazimir pulled her into an embrace, wrapping his arms around her and feeling the solid reality of another person pressed against him. Her heart beat steady against his chest, her warmth seeping through the layers of clothing, and he memorized every detail of the sensation. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. I don't know how to feel this much and still function. You learn, one day at a time, one feeling at a time, and you don't have to do it alone. Zara leaned back to look up at him. I'm here, for as long as you want me here. Always, Kazimir said, and meant it with an intensity that frightened him. I want you here always. Then we'll start with tomorrow and see how it goes. They parted reluctantly, Zara promising to come back the next evening after her scheduled appointments. Kazimir descended to his court's chambers as dawn approached, his mind racing with everything that had changed in a single night. He found Draven waiting in his private quarters, concern written clearly on his face. My lord, you've been gone for hours. I was beginning to worry. Draven stopped, staring. Something's different. Everything's different. Kazimir sat heavily in one of the antique chairs that he could now feel the velvet texture of, the carved wood solid beneath him. The curse is broken. What? How? The piano tuner kissed me and it shattered. 800 years of purchased numbness, gone in an instant. He looked at his hands, still marveling at the sensation of air moving across his skin. I can feel again, Draven. Everything. That's extraordinary. Draven moved closer, studying him. How are you managing it? Barely. It's overwhelming, and the grief I was avoiding, it's all still there, exactly as strong as the night Mira died. Draven's expression softened with old pain. He'd known Mira, had served as Kazimir's second even then, had been part of the search party that found her too late. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate, but I'm sorry you're having to face that again. It was always going to catch up to me eventually. I just thought I had more time. Kazimir stood and began pacing, needing movement to manage the excess energy flooding his system. The court can't know about the grief. They can know the curse broke, but not why I sought it in the first place, not the extent of it. They'll ask questions. Let them ask. I'll tell them I tested a blood witch's curse and found it could be broken. They don't need to know it was self-inflicted or that I'm currently barely holding myself together. And the mortal woman? The one who kissed you? Kazimir met his second's eyes. Her name is Zara Thorn, and she's under my protection. Anyone who threatens her answers to me directly. Understood. Should I arrange accommodations for her here? Not yet. She has a life, a family, commitments. I'm not going to upend her entire existence without her consent. He paused. But yes, eventually, if she's willing. Draven nodded slowly. The council will convene at sunset. You'll need to address them about the change. Some of them will view the return of your physical senses as a liability. Some of them view everything as a liability. I've ruled this court for 800 years, Draven. I'm not about to let a few conservative elders undermine me now. Of course, my lord. But when the sun set that evening and Kazimir faced his assembled court, he could feel their scrutiny in a way he never had before. Every gaze felt weighted, every whisper seemed louder, and he had to consciously control his reactions to maintain the appearance of calm authority. I have an announcement, he said, and the chamber fell silent. The curse that has prevented me from experiencing physical sensation for the past 8 centuries has been broken. As of last night, I am no longer numb to touch, taste, temperature, or pain. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs of surprise, a few gasps, and from the back of the chamber, one of the older council members, Theron, stood abruptly. How is this possible? Elisabetta's curses were legendary. They couldn't be broken without the original caster's intervention, and she's been dead for centuries. Apparently they can be broken under the right circumstances, Kazimir replied evenly. The specifics are not relevant. What matters is that this changes nothing about my ability to lead this court or enforce our laws. With respect, my lord, it changes everything. Theron stepped forward, his expression grave. For 800 years, you've been immune to physical coercion, to pleasure and pain, to the kinds of manipulation that have compromised lesser rulers. That immunity was your greatest strength. Without it, I'm simply a king who can feel what he touches, the same as every other vampire in this chamber. Kazimir kept his voice level, though he could feel irritation rising in a way that was both familiar and strange after so long without emotion. Are you suggesting that you're all unfit to serve because you can experience sensation? Of course not. But none of us carry the responsibility that you do. None of us make decisions that affect thousands of lives across the city. And if you can now be swayed by physical pleasure or intimidated by physical pain, then I would be exactly like every other ruler in vampire history who managed to govern effectively despite their functioning nervous systems. Kazimir interrupted. Your concern is noted and dismissed, Theron. This matter is not open for debate. The older vampire's jaw tightened, but he bowed slightly and returned to his seat. Kazimir continued the session, working through the standard agenda items, but he could feel the tension in the room. They were worried. Some of them were even afraid, though whether they feared for him or of him, he couldn't quite tell. After he dismissed the formal session, Severin approached him privately. Unlike Theron, Severin was younger, only 300 years old, and had always been more pragmatic than political. If I may speak freely, my lord? You may. Theron is an idiot, but he's not entirely wrong about the implications. There will be those who see this as an opportunity to test you, to push boundaries they wouldn't have dared push before. Severin paused. And there's another concern. Which is? Elisabetta's curses always came with a cost. A bargain struck and a price to be paid. If the curse has broken, it's possible the unpaid portion of the original bargain just came due. Kazimir felt cold understanding settle in his chest. He'd paid Elisabetta half upfront blood and gold with the remainder to be settled at her discretion. But she died before collecting, and he'd assumed the debt died with her. If Severin was right, if breaking the curse triggered the remaining payment. Elisabetta had no heirs, he said carefully. No direct descendants, no. But blood witches often pass their contracts to apprentices or chosen successors. If someone inherited her ledger, then they'd have legal claim to whatever debt I owe. Kazimir exhaled slowly. Research it, quietly. Find out if Elisabetta had students, if anyone might have inherited her practice. I'll start immediately. Severin left, and Kazimir retreated to his quarters, exhaustion creeping through him in a way it hadn't for centuries. He could feel it now, the weight of his body, the tiredness in his muscles, the need for actual rest instead of just waiting out the daylight hours. He lay down on his bed properly for the first time in 800 years and fell into real sleep. He dreamed of Mira. They were children again. Or at least he was young, barely 50 years old, newly turned, still learning what it meant to be vampire. Mira was mortal then. His baby sister who'd begged him to turn her when she came of age because she didn't want to grow old and die while he stayed young forever. He'd agreed, promising to change her when she reached 25, when she'd had time to live a full mortal life first. She never made it to 25. In the dream, they were in the old fortress where they'd grown up, and Mira was playing her lute, singing a song their mother had taught them. Her voice was clear and joyful, and Kazimir sat listening, content in a way he couldn't remember being in waking life. Then the scene shifted, as dreams do, and suddenly she was burning. Flames everywhere, her screams tearing through the air, and he was running but couldn't reach her. Too far away. Always too far away. He woke gasping, the grief raw and immediate, and found tears on his face. He could feel them, the wet tracks down his cheeks, the tightness in his throat, the ache in his chest that had nothing to do with physical pain. He curled onto his side and let himself cry properly for the first time in 800 years, mourning his sister the way he should have mourned her from the beginning. When the storm finally passed, he felt emptied out but somehow lighter. The grief was still there, but it had shifted from a crushing weight to something more manageable, something he could carry. His phone rang. a modern convenience that still felt strange even after decades of use. He answered it to find Draven on the line. "My lord, the mortal woman is here, Zara Thorn. She's asking to see you." Kazimir sat up quickly. "Send her to my quarters." "Are you certain? The private chambers?" "Send her down, Draven." 5 minutes later, there was a knock on his door. Kazimir opened it to find Zara standing in the hallway, looking simultaneously nervous and determined. She was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual coveralls, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "Hi," she said. "I know it's early, but I couldn't stop thinking about last night and I wanted to make sure you were okay. And your security guy tried to tell me you weren't receiving visitors, but I told him I was the piano tuner and there was an emergency with the concert hall piano, which is obviously a lie, but he seemed to buy it and—" She stopped, taking a breath. "Sorry, I'm rambling. Are you okay?" Kazimir pulled her inside and closed the door, then wrapped her in his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the solid reality of her presence. "I'm managing. It's been an overwhelming day." "I can imagine. Or actually, I probably can't. But I'm trying." She hugged him back tightly, then pulled away to study his face. "Have you been crying?" "Yes." "Because of your sister?" "Yes." Zara nodded, accepting this without judgment. "Do you want to talk about it, or would you rather be distracted?" The fact that she offered both options, that she didn't push him toward confession or brush past the pain, made Kazimir's chest ache in an entirely different way. "Distraction, I think. What did you have in mind?" "Well, I brought food." She held up a bag he hadn't noticed earlier. "I wasn't sure if you could eat now that the curse is broken, but I figured it was worth a shot. And if you can't, I'll eat it and you can watch me and we can call it a weird sort of date." "I can eat. I don't need to, but I can." "Perfect. I brought Chinese takeout because it's the universal solution to difficult days." She moved into his quarters, looking around with open curiosity. "This is not what I expected Vampire King accommodations to look like." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Coffins? Dungeons? More cobwebs?" She grinned at him. "This is almost normal. Expensive and kind of old-fashioned, but normal." They sat on his couch, an antique from the 1890s that Kazimir could now properly appreciate the texture of, and Zara unpacked containers of noodles and dumplings and rice. The smell was overwhelming, his newly returned senses struggling to process the complexity of it, and when he took his first bite in 800 years, he nearly wept again. "Okay?" Zara asked, watching him carefully. "It's extraordinary. I'd forgotten." He stopped, trying to find words for the experience. "I'd forgotten that food could taste like anything beyond a vague intellectual understanding of flavor. This is Szechuan noodles from the place on 5th Street. They're pretty good. They're perfect." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Kazimir marveled at every sensation. The heat of the spices, the texture of the noodles, the way the flavors built and changed with each bite. He was clumsy with the chopsticks, his muscle memory rusty, and Zara laughed when he dropped a dumpling for the 3rd time. "You know, for an 800-year-old vampire king, you're kind of terrible at eating." "I'm out of practice. Here." She fed him the next dumpling directly, and the intimacy of it, her fingers near his mouth, her eyes on his, was almost more overwhelming than the food itself. After they finished eating, Zara curled up against his side, her head on his shoulder, and Kazimir wrapped an arm around her, still amazed that he could feel the weight of her, the warmth of her body against his. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Anything. What was your sister like? Mira?" Kazimir tensed slightly but forced himself to relax. If he was going to move forward, he needed to be able to talk about this. She was joyful. Fierce and joyful and completely fearless. She wanted to experience everything, see everything, and she was furious that her mortal lifespan would limit her. That's why she asked me to turn her. "How old was she when she died?" 23, 2 years before I was supposed to change her." He stared at the ceiling, letting the memories come. She was visiting a neighboring territory, staying with friends I'd vouched for. The local hunters decided to raid the household. They didn't care about guilt or innocence. If you were vampire or vampire adjacent, you burned. Mira was caught in the attack. By the time I got word and traveled back, it was over. They'd executed 15 vampires and 3 mortal servants, and Mira was among the dead. Zara's hand found his, lacing their fingers together. I'm so sorry. I failed her. I was so focused on stupid political maneuvering, on maintaining alliances and territory, that I didn't see the danger. I should have been there. I should have protected her. Kazimir, you can't. Zara shifted to look at him properly. You can't control everything. You couldn't have known the hunters would attack. It wasn't your fault. I was her older brother. Her protection was literally my responsibility. And you were also a person with other responsibilities. You were trying to keep peace between territories, right? That protected other people. You can't be everywhere at once, and you can't save everyone. And the fact that you couldn't save her doesn't mean you failed. It means the hunters were murderers, and she got unlucky. I spent 800 years believing I failed. Then maybe it's time to believe something different. Zara sat up, pulling him around to face her. Maybe it's time to believe that grief doesn't require guilt, that you can miss her and mourn her without turning it into some kind of eternal punishment. Maybe that's what moving forward looks like. Kazimir pulled her close and kissed her, feeling everything, the softness of her lips, the slight catch in her breath, the way she melted into him with absolute trust. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. That's not how this works. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing each other anyway. She kissed him again, brief and sweet. And I choose you. Complicated grief, vampire politics, 800-year-old baggage, and all. They spent the rest of the evening talking. Kazimir told her about Mira properly, the good memories, the laughter, the plans they'd made. Zara told him about her mother, about growing up with 3 younger siblings she'd half-raised, about learning piano in a household that was always too loud and too full and perfect in its chaos. They built a foundation of shared grief and mutual understanding, and Kazimir felt something in his chest unknot slightly. Near midnight, Zara reluctantly said she needed to go home. I have a morning appointment to tune a piano at the university, and I need at least a few hours of sleep. Let me have someone drive you. I've got my car. Then let me walk you to it. They made their way up through the building, Kazimir hyper-aware of the court members they passed. Several gave Zara curious looks, but none dared to question her presence. When they reached the parking garage, Kazimir pulled her aside into the shadows. Be careful, he said. If what my advisor suspects is true, there may be someone coming to collect on the debt from the original curse. A blood witch heir. What would they want? I don't know. The original bargain was vague about the second payment. It could be anything from blood to service to something more abstract. Zara frowned. Can you just pay them off? Give them money and call it settled? Blood witch debts don't work that way. They deal in magic and life force and cosmic balance. Money is irrelevant. That's deeply inconvenient. Agreed. She kissed him once more, fierce and claiming, then got in her car. Text me tomorrow. Let me know you're okay. I will. Kazimir watched her drive away, then returned to his court, his mind already working through contingencies. If there was a blood witch heir coming to collect, he needed to be prepared, needed to understand exactly what he'd agreed to 800 years ago and what the consequences might be now. Severin found him in his private study 3 hours later, looking grim. I found her, Severin said without preamble. Elisabetta's heir, a blood witch named Nyx, who inherited the practice 40 years ago. She lives in the south side and has been quietly collecting on old debts for decades. And she knows about my contract? Almost certainly. Blood witches are meticulous about their ledgers. If Nyx inherited Elisabetta's practice, she inherited the records. Has she made contact? Not yet. But Severin hesitated. I asked around carefully. Nyx has a reputation for being ruthless about debt collection. She doesn't negotiate, doesn't accept substitutions. She takes exactly what the original bargain specified, no more and no less. Then I need to know what the original bargain specified. Do we have any record of my contract with Elisabetta? Nothing in our archives, but Nix would have it. If you want to know what you owe, you'll have to ask her directly. Kazimir nodded slowly. Arrange a meeting, neutral territory, proper protocols. I want this settled before it becomes a problem. The meeting was set for 3 nights later, in a warehouse on the border between vampire territory and the neutral zones where blood witches typically operated. Kazimir brought Draven and Severin as witnesses, along with 2 guards for security. They arrived precisely at midnight to find the space already prepared, a circle drawn in salt and ash, candles burning at the cardinal points, and a woman waiting in the center. Nix was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 40 in mortal appearance, with silver-white hair and eyes that were completely black from lid to lid. She wore modern clothes, jeans, and a leather jacket, but carried herself with the timeless arrogance of someone who dealt in powers older than civilization. Kazimir Kovar, she said as he approached. The Vampire King who bargained away his senses and forgot to pay the full price. I've been expecting you. Then you know why I'm here. To settle the debt your curse-breaking triggered. Yes. She pulled a leather-bound ledger from her bag and opened it, flipping through pages covered in cramped handwriting until she found what she wanted. Elisabetta's contract with you, dated September 12, 24. Payment for removal of all physical sensation, half rendered up front in blood and gold, half to be rendered upon dissolution of the curse or at the caster's discretion, whichever comes first. The curse is dissolved. I'm here to pay. Good. Here are the terms of the second payment. Nix read from the ledger with perfect dispassion. You will surrender one thing you hold most dear, to be determined at the time of collection based on what has greatest value to your heart. Said item or person or concept will be claimed by the caster and disposed of as they see fit. Kazimir's blood went cold. Person? The contract doesn't specify limitations. It could be an object, a memory, a position, a relationship. Whatever you value most highly at the moment of debt collection. Nix looked up from the ledger. Elisabetta liked these open-ended bargains. They tended to be more cruel. I won't surrender a person. Then you'll remain in debt, and I'll be entitled to take what I'm owed by force at a time of my choosing. Blood Witch law is very clear on this point, Kazimir. The debt must be paid. Severin stepped forward. There has to be room for negotiation, an alternative payment. No. Nix closed the ledger. The terms were agreed upon 800 years ago. I'm simply collecting what's owed. Kazimir's mind raced through possibilities. What did he value most? His position as king, the court he'd built, his power, his territory, his Zara. He valued Zara most. After 1 week of knowing her, 1 night of having his senses returned, she'd become the thing he held most dear because she represented the possibility of moving forward instead of staying frozen in grief. And Nix would know that. Blood witches could sense emotional attachment like other people could sense temperature. I need time to consider, he said carefully. You have until the next full moon, that's 2 weeks. After that, I collect by force, and you lose not just the thing you value most, but everything I can claim in the taking. Nix tucked the ledger away. I suggest you use the time wisely. The meeting ended, and Kazimir returned to his court in a state of carefully controlled fury. He dismissed everyone except Draven and retreated to his private quarters, where he proceeded to break a chair from the 1600s by throwing it against the wall. My lord, I can't give her Zara. Kazimir's voice was rough. I can't. It's been 1 week and I can't. This isn't possible. Perhaps there's something else, something you value that you could offer instead. You think I haven't thought of that? I've spent 800 years not valuing anything specifically so I couldn't be manipulated or controlled. And now the one thing I do value, the one person He stopped, the admission too new and raw to speak aloud. You love her. I barely know her. That doesn't answer the question. Kazimir sat on the ruined chair's companion piece, his head in his hands. Yes, I love her. which is insane because it's been less than a week, but I love her, and I can't let that blood witch take her. Then we find another solution. What solution? The contract is binding. Nyx has every legal right to collect, and if I refuse, she can strip me of everything through blood witch law. She could take the court, the territory, my power itself. So we eliminate her before she can collect. Kazimir looked up sharply. Murder a blood witch? Do you have any idea what kind of retaliation that would bring down on us? Her entire coven would come for revenge, and they'd be entitled to it under supernatural law. We'd be marked as oath-breakers, contract violators. Every blood witch on the continent would have the right to attack us. Then what do you propose? I don't know. Kazimir stood and began pacing, needing movement. There has to be something I'm missing, some clause or loophole or... His phone rang. Zara's name on the screen. He answered immediately. Hey, she said, sounding cheerful and utterly unaware of the crisis unfolding. I know it's late, but I just finished a job and I'm near your building. Want company? Always. Come down. She arrived 15 minutes later, and Kazimir met her at the entrance personally, pulling her into an embrace that was probably too intense but that he couldn't help. Zara hugged him back just as tightly. Okay, something's wrong. What happened? He told her. All of it. The meeting with Nyx, the terms of the debt, the impossible choice he was facing. Zara listened without interrupting, her expression growing progressively more serious. So basically this witch owns your debt, and the debt is whatever you care about most, and she's planning to take me. She didn't say it explicitly, but yes, that's the implication. And if you refuse, she takes everything by force. Yes. Zara was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she said, what if I'm not the thing you value most? You are. But what if you could value something else more? What if we found something else to care about, something that you'd be willing to give up, and we made sure you valued it more than me? Kazimir stared at her. That's not how emotions work, Zara. I can't just decide to care about something else more than I care about you. Maybe not, but you could pretend. You could act like something else mattered more, convince everyone including the witch, and then give her that instead. Blood witches can sense emotional attachment. She'd know if I was lying. Unless you weren't lying. Unless you actually believed it. Zara grabbed his hands, her eyes bright with the beginnings of a plan. What if we did something drastic? What if you publicly rejected me, cast me out of your life, made it clear that I meant nothing to you, and then focused all your attention on something else, your court, or a specific treasure, or no? Kazimir pulled her closer. I'm not rejecting you, publicly or privately. I'm not pretending you don't matter. I just got you, Zara. I'm not giving you up even as a ruse. Then what's your alternative? Let her take me for real? I'll find another way. There isn't another way. You said so yourself. The contract is binding, she has legal right to collect, and refusing means losing everything. Zara's voice was sharp with frustration. I'm trying to give you a solution here. A solution that requires me to hurt you and lie about my feelings. That's not acceptable. It's better than me being handed over to a blood witch who will dispose of me as she sees fit. What does that even mean? Is she going to kill me? I don't know. Possibly. Or curse you, or bind you to service, or use you for spell components. Kazimir felt sick saying it. Blood witches view mortals as resources. Whatever she does, it won't be pleasant. Then we have to try my plan. No. Kazimir. I said no. His voice came out harder than he intended, and Zara flinched slightly. He immediately gentled his tone. I'm sorry, but I'm not doing that. I'll challenge the contract, find a technicality, argue it before the supernatural courts if I have to. But I'm not pretending you don't matter to me. Zara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, then we do it your way. But if we can't find a loophole by the full moon, we will. But if we don't, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't sacrifice your court or your position to save me. I know I matter to you, but you've built something important here. You protect people, you maintain order, you've spent 800 years creating this. Don't throw it all away for someone you've known for a week. You're worth more than all of it." That's sweet and extremely dramatic, but no, I'm a 27-year-old piano tuner, Kazimir. You're a vampire king who's responsible for thousands of lives. The math doesn't work. She cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle. "Promise me. If it comes down to choosing between me and your court, you choose the court." "I can't promise that." "Then I'm leaving right now and you won't see me again until after the full moon." It was a bluff, probably. But Kazimir couldn't take the chance. "Fine, I promise. But it won't come to that because we're going to find another solution." They spent the next week trying. Kazimir consulted every legal expert in his territory, reached out to contacts in other cities, even arranged a meeting with the Southside Coven to see if there was precedent for modifying Blood Witch contracts. The answer was always the same. The debt was binding, the terms were clear, and Nyx had every right to collect. Meanwhile, Zara continued her regular life, tuning pianos and visiting Kazimir every evening. They fell into a routine that felt both desperately urgent and perfectly ordinary. Dinner together, conversation, stolen moments of affection before she had to return home. Kazimir memorized every detail of her, the way she laughed, the concentration on her face when she was solving a problem, the absolute confidence with which she moved through the world. He also told her more about Mira. The stories poured out of him like water from a broken dam, 800 years of suppressed memories finding voice. Zara listened to all of it, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, mourning the loss with him. And slowly, incrementally, the grief began to transform. It was still there, but it was changing shape exactly the way Zara had predicted, becoming something he could carry instead of something that crushed him. "You should build her a memorial," Zara said one evening as they sat in the concert hall after hours. "Something permanent. A place where you can remember her properly instead of just carrying the loss around." "I wouldn't know how." "Sure you would. You've got this whole building dedicated to music because she loved it. That's already a memorial. You could just make it official. A plaque, or a room named after her, or something." The idea settled into Kazimir's mind and took root. A memorial, an actual, physical acknowledgement of Mira's existence and the space she'd occupied in his life. He'd spent 800 years trying to forget, trying to avoid the pain, and maybe what he needed was the opposite, to remember actively, purposefully, with the full weight of his grief and love. "Her name was Mira Kovar," he said quietly. "She was born in 1201 and died in 1224, and she loved music more than anything except maybe the people she cared about. She deserved better than to die young and be forgotten." "Then let's make sure she's not forgotten." Zara squeezed his hand. "We'll create something beautiful for her, something that lasts." They spent the next few days designing it together. Zara suggested dedicating the hall's main performance space to Mira, with a plaque explaining who she was and why the space honored her. Kazimir expanded the idea to include a scholarship fund for young musicians, particularly women, to study and perform. It felt right away to channel his grief into something generative instead of destructive. The full moon was 3 days away when Severin came to Kazimir with unexpected news. "I found something in the old texts. It's not a loophole exactly, but it's a precedent." "Tell me." "Blood Witch debts can be satisfied by ritual completion instead of literal payment if the original curse was self-imposed as penance for a specific failure." Severin pulled out a heavy leather tome, marking a passage. "It's rare, but there's a case from 1634 where a vampire lord sought numbness after failing to save his territory from plague. When the debt came due, he was allowed to discharge it by completing the task he'd originally failed in his case, establishing a hospital to treat future outbreaks." Kazimir felt hope kindle for the first time in days. "So if I can complete the task, I failed when I sought the curse. You might be able to discharge the debt without surrendering what you value most, but it would have to be exact. Whatever you were supposed to do for Mira that you didn't, you'd have to do now." "I was supposed to protect her. She's been dead for 800 years. I can't protect her now." "Then what else? What did you fail to do?" Kazimir thought back to that terrible year. He'd failed to be present when she needed him, failed to recognize the danger, failed to save her from the flames, and afterward, consumed by grief and guilt, he'd failed to— "I never gave her a proper burial," he said slowly. "The hunters burned the bodies and scattered the ashes. I never recovered her remains, never performed the rites, never entered her name in the family records. I was so destroyed by the loss that I just paid the blood witch and tried to forget everything." "Then that's what you need to do. Give her the burial rites you should have given her 800 years ago." "How?" "Her ashes are long gone, scattered across a territory that doesn't even exist anymore. The records from that time were destroyed centuries ago. The rites don't require physical remains. They require acknowledgement, witness, and ritual closure. You need to speak her name into the official record, acknowledge her death and her life, and perform whatever ceremony your family tradition required." Severin leaned forward. "Can you do that?" "I don't know. I haven't thought about our family traditions in centuries. I'm not even sure I remember them all." "Then you'd better remember fast. The full moon is in 3 days." Kazimir spent the next 72 hours in a state of intense focus. He reached out to the few surviving members of his original bloodline, vampires he hadn't contacted in centuries, and asked them about the burial traditions. He researched the old records, found references to the rites their family had practiced, and began to piece together what he needed to do. Zara helped. She took time off work to sit with him in the archives, reading through documents in languages she didn't understand just to keep him company. She brought food he barely touched and made him sleep when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. And when he confessed that he was terrified this wouldn't work, that Nyx would reject the ritual completion and take her anyway, Zara kissed him and told him to have faith. "You spent 800 years running from this grief," she said. "Now you're running toward it, facing it head on. That means something. That has to count for something." The night before the full moon, Kazimir arranged everything. He contacted Nyx and explained what he intended to do, citing the precedent Severin had found. She was skeptical but agreed to attend the ritual and witness whether it satisfied the debt. Kazimir also gathered his court, told them the full story of Mira's death and his curse for the first time in 8 centuries, and invited them to be present for the memorial rites. They assembled in the concert hall at midnight. The entire court, Nyx and 2 other blood witches as witnesses, and Zara, who stood at Kazimir's side despite his suggestion that she stay away in case this went badly. Kazimir had prepared the space according to the old traditions. Candles arranged in the pattern his family had used for funerals, a bowl of earth from the territory where Mira had died that he'd had specially transported, and the family records recreated from memory and documented formally for the first time since her death. He began the rite by speaking her name into the record. Mira Kovar, born 1201 in the Northern Territories, died 1224 in the Eastern Holdings. My sister, my blood, my family. I acknowledge her life, her death, and my failure to honor her properly at the time of her passing. The words were harder than he'd expected. 800 years of suppressed grief pushing up through his chest, demanding to be felt. But he continued, following the ritual structure his bloodline had used for generations. I failed to protect her when she needed protection. I failed to avenge her death when vengeance was warranted. I failed to lay her to rest with the honor she deserved. His voice broke, but he forced himself to continue. I spent 8 centuries running from this grief instead of surviving it. I sought numbness instead of healing. I abandoned her memory because remembering hurt too much. He could feel the assembled vampires watching, their attention absolute. Could feel Nyx evaluating whether this constituted adequate payment. Could feel Zara's hand find his, grounding him. I'm here now to complete what I should have done then, to speak her name, acknowledge her loss, and give her the memorial she deserved. He gestured to the plaque they'd mounted on the wall, brass engraved with Mira's name and dates. This hall is dedicated to her memory. The music played here honors her love of song. The scholarships established in her name will help others pursue what she never got the chance to complete. He performed the final ritual steps, scattering the earth, lighting the memorial candle, speaking the words of farewell that their family had used to send loved ones to whatever came next. By the time he finished, tears were streaming down his face, but his voice was steady. I release you, Mira. I release the guilt. I acknowledge that I failed you, and I acknowledge that I've punished myself enough. I choose to remember you with love instead of grief, to honor you with action instead of avoidance. You deserved better than I gave you, and I'm sorry. But I'm here now, and I'm saying goodbye properly. Rest well, little sister." The hall was silent. Kazimir stood there, tears drying on his cheeks, feeling lighter than he had in 8 centuries. The grief was still there, but it had transformed completely. No longer a crushing weight or a caustic burn, just a gentle ache of love for someone lost. Nyx stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "The ritual is complete. The debt is discharged." Kazimir felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "You're certain? Blood witch law is clear. You sought the curse as penance for failing to honor your sister properly. You've now completed that honor in full, with witnesses and ritual weight. The original bargain is satisfied." She pulled out her ledger and made a notation, then snapped it closed. "You're free of the debt, Kazimir Kovar. Don't make another one." "I don't intend to." Nyx and her companions left. The court members approached one by one, offering condolences for a loss 800 years old but newly mourned, and Kazimir accepted their words with grace. When everyone else had departed, only Zara remained. She walked to him slowly and wrapped her arms around him, and Kazimir held her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "You did it," she said quietly. "You faced it and you did it. We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." "Sure you could have. It would have just taken you another 800 years. She pulled back to smile at him, her eyes bright. "I'm proud of you. I know that's a weird thing to say to someone who's been alive for over 9 centuries, but I am. You chose to heal instead of staying numb, and that took real courage." "I chose you," Kazimir corrected. "Everything else followed from that. You broke the curse, you made me feel again. You convinced me that grief could be survived. All of this started the night you kissed me. Then I guess I have excellent timing. Exceptionally excellent timing." They stood there in the memorial hall, surrounded by the evidence of loss transformed into remembrance, and Kazimir felt something he hadn't felt in 8 centuries. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the ability to carry pain alongside joy. Not numbness, but balance. "I love you," he said, the words emerging naturally for the first time. "I know it's fast. I know it's probably too soon. But I love you, Zara Thorne." "I love you too," Zara replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "And it's not too soon. It's exactly the right time." In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Kazimir continued leading his court, but with a difference. He could feel everything now, the texture of power, the weight of responsibility, the genuine connection with the people he governed. Some of the conservative elders remained skeptical of his ability to rule while experiencing sensation, but they couldn't argue with results. His judgments were still fair, his enforcement still consistent, his leadership still strong. He just smiled more now, laughed occasionally, let himself enjoy the small pleasures of existence instead of moving through life in a gray fog. Zara integrated into his world gradually. She kept her piano tuning business, but moved into the building after several weeks of increasingly frequent overnight stays. The court accepted her with varying degrees of warmth, but even the most traditional members had to admit that the king seemed more genuinely content than he had in living memory. She also helped Kazimir plan the Memorial Scholarship Program, interviewing candidates and selecting recipients. The first scholarship went to a 19-year-old violinist named Lydia, who reminded Kazimir so much of Mira that he had to leave the room for a moment to compose himself. But it was a good pain, a meaningful pain, the kind that honored memory instead of avoiding it. 3 months after the curse broke, Kazimir took Zara to the archives and showed her the complete family records he'd reconstructed. Mira's name was there now, properly documented, her life and death acknowledged in the official ledger. It felt like closure in a way he hadn't expected. "She would have liked you," he said, tracing Mira's name with one finger. "She would have appreciated your practicality and your stubbornness, and your complete lack of fear when dealing with powerful supernatural beings." "I have plenty of fear. I just hide it well." Zara leaned against him, reading the old script. "I wish I could have met her. She would have been delighted that I finally found someone. She used to tease me about being too serious, too focused on duty. She'd say I needed someone to remind me how to enjoy life. She sounds wise. She was. Far wiser than I ever gave her credit for. They stood in the quiet archives, surrounded by centuries of history, and Kazimir felt grateful. Grateful that the curse had broken, grateful that he'd been forced to face his grief, grateful for this woman who'd appeared in his life at exactly the moment he needed her most. 6 months after they met, Kazimir asked Zara if she wanted to be turned. They were in bed in his quarters, the dawn approaching, and Zara was tracing patterns on his chest with her fingers. "I've been thinking about the future," he said carefully. "About what it looks like when you're mortal and I'm not." "I've thought about it too," Zara replied. "You're going to be around for centuries, and I've got maybe another 60 years if I'm lucky. That's not enough time. I know. So I'm asking, not demanding, not expecting, just asking if you'd want to be turned, to become vampire, to have as much time as I do." Zara was quiet for a long moment. "Would I have to give up music?" "No. You could still play, still tune, still do everything you do now. You'd just do it forever instead of for a handful of decades." "And sunlight? I'd have to give up sunlight?" "Yes. We can exist during the day in protected spaces, but direct sunlight is lethal." "What about my family, my siblings?" "You could still see them, but they'd age and die while you stayed young. That's one of the hardest parts of immortality, watching mortals you love pass on." Zara rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. "That's a lot to give up." "It is. Which is why I'm asking, not pushing. If you want to stay mortal, I'll take whatever time we have and be grateful for it. But if you want forever," he turned to face her, "I'm offering forever." "Let me think about it," Zara said. "This isn't a decision I want to make lightly. Take all the time you need." She took 3 weeks. During that time, she talked to her siblings, arranged her affairs, and spent long hours sitting in the sun, absorbing the warmth she'd be giving up. Kazimir watched and waited, trying not to hope too hard, trying to prepare himself for the possibility that she'd choose mortality. Finally, one evening, she came to him with her decision. "I want to be turned," she said without preamble. "Not because I'm afraid of dying, and not because I can't imagine life without you, but because I want to see what I can build with centuries instead of decades. I want to learn every instrument, master every style of music, maybe even compose something that lasts. And I want to do it with you." Relief flooded through Kazimir so intensely that he had to sit down. "You're certain?" "I'm certain. When do we do this?" "Whenever you're ready. The process is painful and takes several days. You'll need to settle your mortal affairs first. Say whatever goodbyes you need to say." "I've already done that. My siblings know I'm moving away, starting a new life. They think I'm being dramatic and romantic, but they support it." She sat beside him, taking his hands. "I'm ready, Kazimir. Turn me." They did it that night. Kazimir prepared her carefully, explained every step of the process, made sure she understood what she was agreeing to. Then he fed from her, tasting her blood for the first time, rich and warm and unmistakably Zara, and gave her his blood in return. The transformation was brutal. 3 days of fever and pain and confusion as her body died and reformed into something new. Kazimir stayed with her through all of it, holding her when she screamed, cooling her with damp cloths when the fever spiked, whispering reassurances when she begged him to make it stop. Draven and Severin helped, bringing blood and supplies, but Kazimir never left her side. On the 3rd night, Zara woke with white skin, white hair, and eyes that had shifted from brown to pale silver. She looked at Kazimir and smiled, fangs extending naturally. "I can hear everything," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The building's settling. Conversations 3 floors up. Your heartbeat. It's amazing. How do you feel? Hungry? Strong? Different?" She sat up carefully, testing her new body. "Is it always this intense?" "The heightened senses settle after a few weeks. You'll learn to filter the input." He cupped her face, marveling at the transformation. "You're beautiful." "I'm pale as a ghost, and my hair looks like I'm 80. "You're beautiful," he repeated firmly. "And you're mine, forever." "Forever," Zara agreed. and kissed him. The newly turned vampire needed to learn everything: how to feed without killing, how to control her strength, how to navigate vampire society and politics. Kazimir taught her patiently, and the court accepted her as their king's chosen mate. Some of them grumbled about her mortal origins, but no one dared challenge his decision openly. Zara adapted quickly. She'd always been practical and determined, and those qualities served her well in her new existence. Within months, she was attending court sessions, offering insights on disputes, and generally making herself invaluable to the governance of the territory. She also continued tuning pianos. The work was easier now with vampire strength and supernatural hearing, and she took pleasure in maintaining the instruments in the memorial hall. The scholarship program flourished, with new musicians receiving funding each year, and Zara personally mentored several of them. One year after the curse broke, Kazimir took Zara to the memorial hall on the anniversary of the night they'd met. Snow was falling outside, the first real snowfall of winter, and Kazimir stood at the window watching the flakes drift down. "I haven't felt snow in 8 centuries, he said quietly. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is." Zara joined him at the window, slipping her hand into his. "We should go outside. It's cold." "So, we're vampires. We can handle a little cold." She tugged him toward the door. "Come on, I want to see it properly." They went up to the roof, to the same spot where she'd kissed him and broken the curse. The snow was falling steadily now, covering the city in white, and Kazimir tilted his face up to feel the flakes melting against his skin, cold and wet and absolutely perfect. "Thank you," he said, pulling Zara close. "For what?" "For kissing me. For breaking the curse. For forcing me to feel again, even when it was painful. For choosing forever with me. For everything. You're welcome for everything." She kissed him, soft and sweet, snowflakes catching in their white hair. "Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your grief and your heart, for building a life with me instead of just existing through eternity alone." They stood there in the first snowfall Kazimir had felt in 800 years, 2 vampires at the beginning of forever, and he thought of Mira. She would have loved this: the romance, the second chances, the transformation of grief into something beautiful. She would have approved. "I love you," Kazimir said, feeling the words with his whole heart. "I love you too," Zara replied. "Forever." "Forever," he agreed, and kissed her as the snow fell around them, covering the memorial hall and the city and the past in clean white silence. The years that followed were good ones. Kazimir ruled his court with Zara at his side, and together they built something neither had expected: a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and deep affection. The memorial scholarship grew into a full conservatory program, training dozens of musicians each year. The concert hall became renowned for its acoustics and its dedication to emerging artists. And every year on the anniversary of the curse breaking, Kazimir and Zara returned to the roof where it had all begun and stood in whatever weather came, grateful for sensation and feeling and the ability to experience the world fully. The grief over Mira never disappeared completely. It couldn't and shouldn't. She'd been important, and her loss mattered. But it transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet ache of love for someone who'd helped shape him into who he was. He visited her memorial regularly, sometimes alone and sometimes with Zara, and spoke to her the way he might if she were still alive, telling her about his life, his work, the woman he loved. He imagined sometimes that she could hear him, that somewhere in whatever came after death, Mira knew he'd finally faced the grief and survived it, that she approved of Zara and the life they were building together, that she was proud of him for choosing to feel instead of staying numb. It was fanciful thinking, perhaps, but it brought him comfort, and after 800 years of avoiding comfort, he'd learned to accept it when it came. The vampire court flourished under his leadership. The territories remained stable, the laws remained fair, and the balance between the mortal and supernatural worlds held steady. Kazimir was still the king, still commanded respect and authority, but he was no longer the cold, untouchable figure who'd ruled through purchased numbness. He was fully present now, fully engaged, and his court was stronger for it. Zara became his partner in every sense of the word. She sat in on council sessions, mediated disputes when he was occupied elsewhere, and generally proved that mortal origins didn't prevent someone from understanding vampire politics. The court learned to respect her not because she was the king's chosen, but because she was competent and fair and genuinely dedicated to the work. She also maintained her connection to music. The conservatory became her particular domain, and she worked tirelessly to ensure that talented musicians had opportunities regardless of their backgrounds. Several of the scholarship recipients went on to international careers, and they always credited the Mira Kovar Memorial Program for giving them their start. On a winter evening 5 years after the curse broke, Kazimir and Zara hosted the conservatory's annual gala in the Memorial Hall. Hundreds of attendees filled the space. Donors, students, musicians, and city officials who believed Kazimir and Zara to be merely wealthy patrons rather than vampire royalty. The event celebrated the year's achievements and announced the new scholarship recipients. Kazimir stood at the edge of the main hall, watching Zara give a speech about the importance of supporting young artists. She was radiant in a formal gown, her white hair swept up elegantly, her silver eyes bright with passion as she spoke. The audience hung on her every word, and Kazimir felt his chest tighten with love. "She's extraordinary," Draven said quietly, appearing at Kazimir's side. "I'll admit I had doubts when you first brought her into the court, but she's proven herself thoroughly." "She has," Kazimir agreed. "And you seem—" Draven paused, searching for the right words. "Content. More genuinely content than I've ever seen you, in all the centuries I've served." "I am. The curse breaking was the best thing that could have happened to me, even though it was terrifying at the time. Do you ever regret it? The 800 years of numbness?" Kazimir considered the question seriously. "Yes and no. I regret the reasons I sought it, the grief I ran from, the healing I avoided. But I can't regret the path that led me here. If the curse had never existed, I would never have tested it that night at the gala. Zara wouldn't have seen me hold my hand in the flame, wouldn't have bandaged it, wouldn't have kissed me on the roof. Everything that followed came from that moment." "So you believe it was meant to be?" "I believe that sometimes terrible things lead to necessary changes. The curse was terrible. Mira's death was terrible. But facing those terrible things, surviving them, learning to carry the grief that transformed me into someone who could actually appreciate what I have now." He gestured toward Zara, who was wrapping up her speech to enthusiastic applause. "I don't believe in fate, but I believe in the importance of choosing to move forward instead of staying frozen. And Zara taught me how to do that." The gala continued late into the night. Music filled the memorial hall, and Kazimir danced with Zara for the first time in public, letting the assembled mortals believe they were simply a devoted couple rather than Vampire King and his eternal mate. The music was beautiful, the company pleasant, and the sensation of Zara in his arms was perfect. As the last guests departed and the staff began cleaning up, Zara kicked off her formal shoes and sat at the grand piano, playing softly. Kazimir joined her on the bench, the way he had that first night when everything changed. "Happy?" he asked. "Extremely. This was a good night." She transitioned into a different melody, something wistful and sweet. "I've been thinking about the future, what we want it to look like. We've got forever now, and I want to make sure we're using it well." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to expand the conservatory, maybe establish programs in other cities, create a network of support for young musicians across the country." She glanced at him. "I know that would require investment and coordination, but I think it's worth doing. Then we'll do it. I'll allocate resources, make connections, whatever you need." "Just like that?" "Just like that. You built something meaningful here, Zara. If you want to expand it, I support that completely." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, still playing with one hand. "I also want to travel, see the world properly. You've been everywhere over the centuries, but I've barely left this city. I want to experience things with you." "We can do that too. There are territories I haven't visited in decades, places that have changed dramatically. We could take a year, travel extensively." "A year sounds perfect." They sat there in the quiet memorial hall, making plans for the future, and Kazimir marveled at how different this felt from the endless gray existence he'd endured for 8 centuries. Then, time had been something to get through, to survive until the next century and the century after that. Now, time was full of possibility and potential, something to enjoy rather than endure. "I love you," he said, the words easier every time he spoke them. "I love you too," Zara replied, her fingers still dancing across the piano keys. "Forever and always." "Forever and always," Kazimir agreed. The snow began falling again outside, visible through the hall's tall windows, and Kazimir thought of Mira, thought of grief transformed into remembrance, of numbness shattered into feeling, of 800 years of running finally ending in the choice to stand still and heal. Thought of the mortal woman who'd kissed him and broken a curse she didn't know existed, who taught him that feeling everything, pain and joy, loss and love, was infinitely preferable to feeling nothing at all. He tightened his arm around Zara, feeling the solid reality of her presence, and let himself be grateful. Grateful for second chances and new beginnings. Grateful for the courage to face old grief and the wisdom to let it transform into something bearable. Grateful for love that appeared unexpectedly and changed everything. The memorial hall stood quiet around them, a monument to loss and remembrance and the healing power of choosing to move forward. Mira's name gleamed on the brass plaque, properly honored at last. The scholarship recipients' names lined the walls, evidence of good work done in her memory. And in the center of it all, two vampires sat together at a piano, planning their forever. It was, Kazimir thought, exactly what happiness looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. Not numbness, but feeling everything fully, the good and the bad, the joy and the grief, the loss and the love, and choosing to keep living anyway. He'd been cursed for 800 years to never feel. The Vampire King broke it the night a mortal woman kissed him. And in the years that followed, he learned that feeling was not weakness, but strength. That grief could be survived. That love was worth the risk of eventual loss. That choosing to be alive, really fully alive, was the bravest thing a person could do, whether they had a mortal lifespan or eternity. The snow fell softly outside, covering the city in white, and Kazimir sat with Zara in the memorial hall, dedicated to his sister's memory, feeling everything, and chose to be grateful for all of it. The centuries ahead stretched out full of promise, and for the first time since Mira's death in 1224, he was actually looking forward to living them. Not just surviving, but living. And that made all the difference.